Hello and welcome. I'm on a bit of a caffeine high at the moment, so I thought it would be a good time to record. Maybe channel this energy into presence. So upon seeing the doctor recently, I was told that my body is in a pre-diabetic state. So it's a new term to understand. So it's almost between the body being in regards to diabetes, the body being normal levels, and the body being diabetic. The in between both of those is what they've termed as pre-diabetic. So there is perhaps danger of my body going into a diabetic state so on one level there isn't a problem. On another level, in regards to the mind, there's a huge problem. There's a reaction of fear, of perhaps regret about the past, about there's another thing to deal with. God, I can't deal with something else that's happening in my life. But in regards to this moment, what can you do but accept? Okay, I've been told that my body is in a certain physical state called pre-diabetic. Okay. So again, it's not accepting the label or the physical state, but it's accepting in this moment, this is the challenge of the body. And in this moment, there's nothing to be done. And it's coming from this spatial awareness, that place of stability, that of course isn't a place, but let's use that word for the moment. So in this spatial awareness, there's nothing to be done in this moment. But action may be needed later. For example, earlier today, I had a cup of coffee and there was awareness into the state of my body, and I didn't have any sugar with my coffee, for example. So there was no thoughts before or after that. There was no sort of fearful panic of, okay, I must do all of these things with my diet. And there's nothing wrong with thought to plan ahead, but there was no reaction to it. You can respond, set aside some time to carefully plan meals or diets, whatever else needs to be done, but it's all done from a place of stability. And often certain things in our life will almost reveal our level of awareness. You could be sitting with a friend drinking coffee. I've probably used this example before, and someone may come inside and say, oh, is that blue car outside yours? And you may say yes, and they say, oh, someone's just hit your car. And immediately there may be a reaction to that. And then you go outside and you see there's two blue cars there, and yours wasn't the one that was hit, and immediately there'll be another reaction of maybe relief. But that's sort of an extreme example, but in some ways, if someone said that, perhaps you could say, oh, you may find yourself instead of reacting, you may find yourself responding to it. Okay, so someone's hit my car. Okay, right. Maybe action is needed to go outside and see if that's true, to see the damage, and then. But you can see the two differences there, and I used an extreme example, perhaps for a bit of humour, in the sense that perhaps it's fair to say, if I dare say, that most of us will react to that. Most of us may not have the space to just remain in our spacious awareness and take action from there. We may, run outside of the shop, run into the street, and our eyes may, in a panic state, look to see, oh God, there's a huge problem that's here. But in every case, there's the opportunity to respond. It may not feel that way, but sometimes it may feel like it because our conditioning can be so quick. It almost seems like it's seamlessly slip into a reaction, and before we know it, we're physically, mentally, energetically reacting to something. But in that blink of an eye, there is always space to respond. Now, as the practice deepens within ourselves, we may find ourselves, a slight gap opens. We may still respond or react, but there may be a slightly longer gap before that happens, whether it's an argument or some situation you've got to respond to, like, say, someone's told you someone's hit your car, and maybe something in a similar situation in the future, you may find yourself for 10 seconds. Oh, okay. And then panic may happen later. But same with this, pre-diabetic response. When I was told the pre-diabetic, I was noting the doctor's calmness with it as well. There wasn't a panic state about it, and perhaps that maybe assisted me in that. And on my way home, I could sense the reaction in me of it. There was a reaction of, that's another thing to deal with in my life. And it was almost pulling at me. It wanted my attention. it wanted me to revel in that sort of misery of, the identity wanted to be strengthened there, of me, who's dealing with depression, anxiety, who's dealing with chest pain and dissociation and brain fog, and now look at what I'm dealing with now. I've got to deal with, being pre-diabetic. And of course the identity, the ego enjoys, on some level enjoys this pain, enjoys me and my poor life. This is what I've got to deal with now. And it almost wants the sympathy of others and sympathy of myself. And then there was another side that was just aware, okay, there's just some information on my physical state. Okay, right. And in that moment, there was thoughts and action that taken. Perhaps I'll share this, even though maybe there's some embarrassment. My ego is embarrassed. Before the doctor's appointment, I had the idea of getting a takeaway pizza. I think I was going to go for a vegan option, because another problem is that I deal with IBS, so digestive I still get non-vegan pizzas, vegetarian with cheese, but before going to a doctor's, I thought, okay, let's, I've had some difficulties with that recently. Let's get a nice vegan pizza for on the way back home. And then I was told I was pre-diabetic. So I left the surgery and painfully walked past the takeaway pizza place. Part of me a bit upset and, and even complaining about that. Part of my mind was, saying, it's another thing to deal with, the pre-diabetic. And then, see, I can't even treat myself to a pizza now. And so in that moment there was action needed to be taken. Or do I get the pizza or do I not? And I made a conscious, maybe painful decision to not get the pizza, to not do that. I thought, okay, let's so that's something that I thought I would share here, as part of my journey. And today I was able to take some conscious action when having, for example, a coffee. There was space to decide, okay, I won't have any sugar with the coffee. And there wasn't a heaviness about it to think, okay, for the rest of my life I've got to reduce sugar now, I've got to deal with this, the threat of diabetes. There was, okay, do I need to have the sugar in this moment? Let's try it without it. And it was okay. I didn't miss the sugar, and it was just, again, dealing with the present moment. So there's no heaviness of carrying the label of pre-diabetic and the threat of, the body going into a diabetic state or dealing with diabetes, which it's in one sense a very serious physical challenge. And there's a spectrum, of course, of different types of diabetes, but there's also dealing with the present moment, and it feels like I was able to, in a very simple way, just take care of the present moment, be aware of the information that was given to me, but not acting from it not giving that to the mind, or not acting out of fear, out of thoughts, out of an unbalanced sense of self. So just wanted to illustrate an example of that. That's happening with me, and maybe I'm sure with each of us there's constant challenges happening on different levels, and perhaps there's now more awareness to respond to the challenges of life, and this is just one very small example of that. I thought the pizza story of what happened would sort of add some humour to this, because of course a great pointer is to not take our thoughts too seriously. And of course there could have been some very serious and negative thoughts around this that quickly could have built a mental structure of me and my poor life, of all of these things I've had to deal with, and now I'm dealing with this. And the mind is an expert in that narrative, in that way of storytelling, instead of just tending to the present moment, what is needed now. Okay, well, I need to decide this or that, or a decision is needed, or maybe no action is needed, nothing to be done in this moment. Okay, and the no action is, of course, action in itself, and it may be what's needed. I've just realised before I read the Karma, continue sharing some of the book of Sadhguru on Karma. I just realised the book is not with me; it's actually in my rucksack. So I'm just going to grab that now. Just going to pop the microphone down. And hopefully we're back in one piece. So we left the sort of book extracts, the reading on I guess chapter 1. So having split into 3 parts, and this is chapter 1. I'll read the Sutra 1 again, the thread that Sadhguru is sharing in regards to the sort of concept, the sort of conceptual description that Sadhguru is giving of karma. And so Sutra 1, karma is about becoming the source of one's own creation. In shifting responsibility from heaven to oneself, one becomes the very maker of one's destiny. And there's a section titled below the sutra, in the driver's seat. So I won't read the small story there, but perhaps share the encouragement that Sadhguru was given, the clear sort of direction when it comes to karma, that perhaps many of us, maybe in a fearful way, perhaps are sitting in the back seat of life, that, life just happens to us, that we've got to just withstand life and the suffering that comes with us. But Sadhguru is kind of instructing us, or saying that we can be in the driver's seat. And it sort of refers again to a little bit of the Sutra 1, that one becomes the very maker of one's destiny. That it says here that if perhaps, for instance, in being in the back seat of the car, I think this is what's being said here, that one's destiny is something that's created unconsciously. But being in the present moment, being in awareness with our actions. Sadhguru was saying, welcome to karma. So you're kind of embracing or understanding the conscious actions of life, the unfolding, the creating. And so I'll read a small extract at the end of the driver's seat where it says, welcome to karma, a dimension that puts you squarely back where you belong, where you were meant to be all along, in the driver's seat. So we can even refer, back to the essence of the books we've read so far. By being in the present moment, by taking conscious action, we are in a driver's seat. And we move into the passage titled Demystifying Karma. So what is karma? It is said here that literally the word means action. And of course, as we shared previously, and what is said in this section here, that there is a great misunderstanding of karma. That people, karma can be seen as a balance sheet of merits and demerits, virtues and sins, a life audit of sorts, it is said here. To others, it is a ledger maintained by some divine chartered accountant who assigns some people to celestial bliss and consigns others to a netherworld or into the maw of some recycling machine that spews them back into this world to suffer some more. And that it is said here that this is not merely false and absurd, it is tragic. So Sadhguru says that let's shatter this first myth of karma. That in actual fact karma has nothing to do with reward and punishment. It has nothing to do with some despotic life auditor up in the sky working with primitive devices of carrot and stick. That karma simply means we have created the blueprint for our lives. It means we are the makers of our own fate. So there's almost a notion here to sort of remove the assumption of fear and misunderstanding of karma. And there is a sharing in this section here that karma is simply a natural part of life in this moment, the unfolding, another way of the creating of life. And it said here that karma is the natural basis of all existence. So it is an active, it is unfolding, it is happening now. It is not a law that is imposed from above. So some useful points there that we are being given of demystifying karma. And there's been one caution given here in this section, that karma is not it's not a doctrine to sort of, to sort of believe in. There's no sort of merit in subscribing. The word is used here, subscribing to it, that you do not get any negative marks for disbelieving karma or believing karma. It is simply the way things are. And it is an existential mechanism. And there's an example given here, like the sun. It operates whether you acknowledge it or not. So again, I use the sort of example of looking under the bonnet of life. So it is sort of the mechanisms of the unfolding of the present moment where action is taking place. And so we move on to the next section in chapter 1, the karmic cycle. So you can see these sort of section titles here. It's given the foundations, it's laying just an understanding. So we all start off on this understanding of the foundations of karma, of what karma is. It is simply action. And now we've come across the title, the karmic cycle. Okay. So although karma means action, it is said here, it does not necessarily refer to physical deeds. Instead, karma is action on 3 levels: body, mind, and energy. That whatever you do on these 3 levels leaves a certain residue or imprint upon you. So just this small section alone, this sentence here, is extremely profound. And it, in regards to myself, it immediately opens my awareness up to every thought, action, and my state of energy in this moment. And it makes sense when, thinking of a new earth and the pointers of presence and the present moment, of how much attuning to the present moment takes care of our karma. This is now sort of revealing the mechanics behind that, but in the teachings of, or pointers of being in the present moment, you can see how it takes care of the physical, the mind, and the energy levels of karma by acting in the present moment. This is what I'm getting from this here, is that how much being in that true self, the energy of the true self, there it takes care, as Mooji says, life takes care of life. Life meaning the aliveness of life in the here and now, not the life of the little me with its problems, its past, its this and it's that. It's the razor's edge of life. I'm borrowing Eckhart's words here. I think this was in the Omega. There's a series of I think I mentioned this in the last episode of Eckhart's. There's a free retreat recordings on YouTube. You type in Eckhart Tolle, Omega. I think it's the Omega Institute where he does the retreat. In one of the sessions there, he talks about the razor's edge, I think of now, the razor's edge of the present moment. And Sadhguru shares that these three elements, energy, body, mind, that almost each one can affect the other. So you can have a thought that affects the body. You can have a physical reaction that affects thought, that provokes thought. And so all of these sense perceptions, our senses are taking in, thoughts are being created. These patterns, if done on a regular basis, it's saying here that slowly shapes ourselves into behavioral tendencies. So if we have behavioral tendencies, things we do regularly, those have been shaped and solidified within us. Those karmic actions, whether it's thoughts, physical deeds, energy, they've not just sort of come out of nowhere, they've slowly shaped over time. Our karmic actions have created these behavioral tendencies. That's how I understand this here. And these cluster of tendencies, they harden over time into what is, I'm reading here, into what you call your personality or what you claim to be your true nature. So that's something we can perhaps look in within ourselves and our behavioral tendencies, and perhaps there may be a sense of sort of, looking over all of our potential flaws of our personality and thinking, okay, but perhaps we can, if you were to look at yourself in our personality, maybe look at it in a place of spatial awareness, just in non-judgmental observation of what some of our tendencies are, that in a sense, there's no panic to, I've got to change, who I am in regards to personality, but perhaps there's just an observation for now of certain behavioral tendencies and an understanding that these behavioral tendencies have been through sort of the patterns that have hardened over time. And of course, these behavioral tendencies have happened in perhaps largely in our unawareness, where we've been acting unconsciously. It's not a case we've chosen to develop this behavioral tendency. They've often happened, and now we are simply aware of the behavior, but we haven't been aware of those tendencies sort of hardening and those patterns developing inside of us. But now, of course, we are in the driver's seat, so perhaps this is the start of the end of these sort of unconscious tendencies developing within us. So it's said here now that what we consider to be ourselves, so what you consider to be myself, that's in quotes, is just an accumulation of habits, predispositions and tendencies that you have acquired over time without being conscious of the process. So as we refer back to the New Earth, the little me, the egoic identity has, these are the attributes that it has. This is me, I like this, I don't like that. This is how I act. I'm a very bubbly person, I talk a lot, or whatever sort of attributes, tendencies that are there. These have been acquired over time without being conscious of the process. And as we move down, it is said here that, in other words, karma is like old software that you have written for yourself unconsciously. So those mental structures, those behavioral patterns, those tendencies that have got a deep groove within us, another way of putting it perhaps, all of this is like a software that runs. And below this it said, and of course you're updating it on a daily basis. So of course each day, each moment there are new the senses are taking in new things it sees, smells, things we think about, our energy, that the impressions are happening in this unfolding, and it is updating perhaps our software. And depending on the type of physical, mental and energetic actions you perform, you write your software. And once that software is written, your whole system functions accordingly. And so you can see life being described here, it is said here, in a sort of habitual, repetitive, cyclical way. When we look at our lives, and even the way we act sometimes as well, these are sort of our habits, our habitual patterns of the actions we do. You can see how it links into these metaphor of the software we have, these unconscious actions we've been taking, thoughts we've been thinking that have created. It mentions the tendencies have hardened. There's been it's now a structure within us, and now it's running. Our actions are running from the software that largely we may be unaware that we are creating and updating on a daily basis. And so you can see, going back to the previous metaphor about sort of driving, if this car was life, that many of us have been in the back seat, in a place of unawareness of life, where we are unaware, not being aware about the software that is running and the updates to that software of how we're living our lives, and not realizing that we're going into repeated situations, recurring patterns of life. The situations keep coming up, the inner and outer situations. And Sadhguru is saying this is because these patterns are unconscious. And as time goes on, you turn into a puppet of your accumulated past. So we move into a solution to this, or a remedy for this unconsciousness, that if one does not consciously rewrite one's karmic software, the regularity of the patterns can feel like it's being imposed on us, almost from the outside, rather than initiated from within. But there's some supportive words here that are shared. But the software is not a fate to be endured. It can be rewritten, dropped or distanced, as we will see later in this book. So the karmic mechanism is ceaseless, which makes sense. As the present moment, life, true life, the one is, there is no end, there's no dying of that spacious awareness. It just simply is. And of course, the karmic mechanism is an element within this. And some examples here, that every mental fluctuation in you creates a chemical reaction, which then proceeds to provoke a physical sensation. That this sensation in turn reinforces the chemical reaction, which then strengthens the mental fluctuation. That over time, your very chemistry is determined by a series of unconscious reactions to sensory and mental stimuli. So in a sense, we're getting into my own perception. Of course, this is just my own understanding of this that I'm sharing here. We're almost getting into the nuts and bolts of the present moment. And like I said, we're looking under the bonnet of it as well. So we're going into the sense of a single thought, and how much, in the sense, power or force or energy that a single thought can have. We can even go back to the someone hitting our car example. If we were to sort of unpack that reaction to it, depending on our karmic software, our what our conditioning will perhaps it links into how we will react to it, if that makes sense. So even if there were 5 people, 5 scenarios, 5 different people were told their car was hit outside, damaged, all 5 may, for example, react in a sort of panic state, but there may be a spectrum to that panic. For some, they may get, their heart may suddenly start racing. Another may have different physical reactions. Another may have much more subtle physical, mental reactions. Another may just have mental reaction. May just think, oh, okay, I've got to deal with that. Let's deal with that. And so we can see now, looking under the hood of depending on our conditioning, our behavioral tendencies, our patterns that have been ingrained in us with our unconscious awareness. And you can see now how the karmic mechanism is turning, is happening, unfolding. So, going back to the sensations, in reading another passage here, all of these sensations register and over time become the blueprint of your unconscious mind. Another metaphor there, a blueprint. So we talked about software and now blueprint. Think about things that have been laid out and planned already or happened. You are therefore a living repository of karmic memory on levels you are not aware of. And that today, research has shown that psychological and emotional traumas can contribute to your risk for mental and physical health problems. That we are told that mental distress can lead to cardiac problems. And of course, none of this is new, it is said here. People always knew that if you go through psychological upheavals, your heart will break. All this happens because your body chemistry changes over a period of time as a result of constant mental and emotional fluctuation. And so we can talk about the cycle that's happening here. We can go back to a very simple example of the stories we tell ourselves, the story of me and my life. Perhaps that's an example of a karmic cycle happening. There may be a life situation that's happened to you. Let's take someone who's been divorced. You can almost see the karmic cycle of that, the unconscious awareness of that karmic memory or that event that is continuously being cycled. I think if I'm understanding this correctly here. And it's being described here as a vicious cycle, of course, because we're bringing up, recreating those emotions and then responding to those emotions, creating more emotions. So that word, that where behavioural tendencies are hardening, you can imagine that story being repeated over and over, the deeper groove that's creating inside of us. And even the words here about the vicious cycle, that the resulting ripples in thoughts in the mind, and are enough to keep going for lifetimes. That's how much we are engaged in this sort of tendency. And that the mind, the processes of the mind, that it pick up momentum without any assistance from us. So perhaps I'll see if there are any other points within this section of the karmic cycle. There's another description here about the past, about our blueprint, our software, that the unconscious mind is therefore a tremendous library of karmic memory. And that, in fact, this could be useful if this information were, if I'll read the passage exactly as it is, you would find this information very useful if you were approaching it consciously. The problem is that it manifests all the time without your permission. You feel like one big mess because you are punching your psychological keyboard randomly all the time. So again, it's referring to, as I understand, is a state of our unawareness. Of course, speaking just for myself, there isn't that continuous, spacious awareness, that conscious presence that can consciously think, consciously act, consciously be aware of the energetic, subtle body, the state, the energetic form. As Eckhart Tolle talks about the inner body. So when there is unawareness there, the typing is happening. The psychological impressions are happening. Physical actions that are creating thought impressions, energetic impressions, and the same the other way around. Unconscious thoughts that unconsciously make an impression on the physical form. So it is that the simplicity of that, of not simply being unaware. So perhaps I can leave it there at this time. So just to sort of go over the subtitles of this chapter, we began with the Sutra of Karma and the message that we can create, that with the conscious awareness we can sort of choose, we can create in this way, that we are not simply running old software and enduring, I think was a word Sadhguru used, have to endure this cycle of karma. And there's a note about demystifying karma, that literally the word means action. And then we move into, yes, the karmic cycle, the software, the blueprint. And it's now sort of easy to see how that's been formed. The unconscious typing, the decades of punching the psychological keys, as it's said here, where we're not consciously choosing our actions, our thoughts, but we have been in the passenger, in the back seat, in the rear seat. But now, with stepping into the present moment, we are now in the driver's seat. We are again, in a sense, breaking the karmic cycle by stepping into the present moment. I think, as Eckhart has said it before, the being in the present moment, it now ends karma. There's nothing now. Karma may be happening with action, but there's no karma to be resolved. There's no impressions made that need to be tended to later. This is how I've understood this here. So I'll leave it on this episode. There is a sense that I'm not sure if I'm going to, how much I'm going to, or perhaps a better way to put it is, I'm going to perhaps be quite flexible with this book here, because it's almost a sense of my own limitations and my own limited understanding on the subject. So even though I'm doing my best to sort of reword and explain what is being said in this book, I feel, to say the least, very unqualified to kind of try and re-explain it from Sadhguru's words. So perhaps to take off the pressure from myself, maybe I can pick and choose certain understandings and try and explain it. And one of the sort of motivations to kind of to remind myself of this reading is not from a place of wisdom, of my wisdom to impart to any listeners. It's simply a motivation, a kind of help to share this book on this podcast, to pretty much help my own self read it. I think without this podcast, it would be very just with my own mental health and other things, there'll be less of a motivation to try and read this book here. So perhaps the sharing of it is not a place from wisdom to impart wisdom to anyone listening, but more a case of helping my own self, trying to understand the spiritual readings that take place on these episodes here. But one thing is to note is, even reading this here, it seems like I'm probably a great deal out of my depth in explaining. It feels this way, but we'll see as the episodes go on. It feels at the moment, in regards to my health, as I've explained before, it's quite a turbulent time. So perhaps it's great to have, perhaps clear any expectations for anything, and just, in a sense, take it an episode at a time. And if there is the energy to share some readings of karma, then perhaps I can try and do that, and perhaps not conform to a structure. With A New Earth, it was almost a pleasure to read it from cover to cover, and I feel like with this book, perhaps with the concepts in there as well, it's a little bit of a different experience to try and read and explain it. So perhaps I may be selective if I do share. Of course, I say it's for myself and to help myself, but there's also the awareness that if of course any benefit is taken from whatever's shared here, of course that's part of this as well. It gives me some purpose to see if there's any, even a shred of benefit that one can take away from this. Also, in terms of course, I'm purely helping myself at the same time, and it's that I'll leave that to life to take care of. Okay, so that's it for this episode. I'm still I think I'm going to drink some more water here to help with my caffeine intake for today. Maybe it's come across more energetic with today's recording. So perhaps I can enjoy the wave of energy instead of fretting, being anxious about the caffeine high, but maybe I can try and surf the wave as I've hopefully done in this episode here. Thank you for joining me for this episode. I wish you well in this present moment, as always, and hey, I'll see you in the next episode. Take care.